Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Taylor Brown, and I am with the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation here at the University of Texas. And Emil asked me to come speak today about empathy and leadership. So we're just going to get started here, just going to jump right into it. Empathy is one of those concepts that's kind of been around for a little bit of time. And it's very kind of ubiquitous right now with being a good leader. But that's a little bit concerning for those of us who research empathy and leadership, because it's just there's so much out there, and a lot of the stuff is pretty surface level, especially with articles online and in the media. So today what I'm going to try to do is go a little bit deeper with this concept and hopefully elucidate some of the things, some of the common misunderstandings and mistakes people make, because it could be really affecting how you interact with your team, how you interact with your coworkers and the people you lead. Again, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat box. I'm going to try to leave maybe about 5 or 10 minutes at the end. Again, there are a lot of people here, so I might not get to all the questions, but I'll do my best. Here's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am today. So I started my higher education at Brown University, and I was researching resilience, and I was also on the rowing team. So I consider that human performance. And then I spent some time as a research assistant at the Center for the Study of Human Development. So college, resilience, human performance, and human development. Then I came down to the University of Texas. I was still training to try to be on the national team for rowing, so some more human performance. I was getting my master's in kinesiology in the sports management program, and I finished my thesis on resilience in sports. So again, resilience. And I spent about 5 years coaching, one of which was at the University of Texas on the women's rowing team. So athlete development. You can see the trend, resilience, performance, development throughout my undergrad and graduate school. When I got the job at CSLI, I started researching a lot of empathy, vulnerability, and courage in leadership. And if that sounds familiar, it's because I was heavily influenced by Brene Brown, and we'll be talking about her a little bit more later. And over the last 3 years, a lot of my speaking has been centered around this idea of conscious leadership, which has 3 pillars: self-awareness, intentionality, and authenticity. So if you have any more questions about who I am or what I'm doing, please feel free to reach out. But we're just going to get going now. This is what you can expect for the next 45 minutes. We're going to go into different types of empathy. We're going to talk about a new way to build empathy and a new way to be empathetic. And then I'm going to try to put this stuff into highly actionable tips and strategies for you guys as you move forward. And then, as we said, we're going to leave about 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. We're going to start right here with the concept of psychological safety. It's the theme for UT Learning and Development for the month. So I wanted to weave in how empathy and psychological safety really complemented each other. So back in 2015, Google had the question of what makes teams effective at Google. And they launched what's called Project Aristotle, which I'm sure most of you or some of you have heard of. This is what they found. It was 4 components: impact, meaning, structure and clarity, dependability, and the number 1, which was psychological safety. So this one underpinned all 4 of the other components. So what exactly is psychological safety?
Hey Taylor, would you mind repeating? We have somebody asking if you could just repeat those 3 pillars again.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just gonna go on back here. There we go. So we have impact, meaning, structure and clarity, dependability, and psychological safety. So psychological safety was underpinning all of the other 4 components. And That means if you didn't have psychological safety, then all the other four were really not as effective as they could be. Just gonna grab a drink here. So we're gonna move forward now. So what exactly is psychological safety? So psychological safety is essentially a belief that individuals in a team can take interpersonal risks without fear of being punished or embarrassed. So it means being comfortable in your team, putting yourself out there, being innovative and being creative. The researcher who coined this term is named Amy Edmondson, and she's a professor from Harvard. And back in 1999, she released an article on psychological safety in teams. And over the last 20 years, she's written a number of books. The most current one is called The Fearless Organization, about psychological safety. In that book, she talks about a number of organizations and teams that have been very effective over the years of creating these environments where people feel safe, and that really builds innovation and develops creativity. One of the organizations that she looked at was Pixar, and how they were able to time and time again crank out record-breaking blockbusters. So she concentrated on these meetings they called brain trust meetings. And in a brain trust meeting, it essentially is taking the filmmaker or director of the movie or film that's currently being developed and produced, and putting them in a room with maybe 15 or 20 other filmmakers and directors from around and outside the company. And what those filmmakers and directors are doing is scene by scene going through the film and saying what's working, what's not working, what should be changed, what should stay the same. And you'd think this would be a very high tension environment, but they were able to create this feeling of psychological safety because they adhere to these 3 rules. And those rules are: feedback must be constructive about the project, not the person. The comments are suggestions, not prescriptions. And candid feedback is not a gotcha, but must come from a place of empathy. I want you to think for a second about why empathy could be an important component of psychological safety. Put yourself in a brain trust meeting. Imagine people are picking apart your work and they're being very honest, and it's with a lot of candor. If those people could empathize with what you were going through, if you felt like they understood your maybe fear, or they understood what you were experiencing that moment, do you think that would help build trust in the meeting, in the team? I think so. So that's why empathy is an important part of psychological safety, and we're going to go into it more today. So where do you go when you want to learn about a concept nowadays? Obviously, Google. That's what I did. I typed empathy into Google, and there were about 1 million results. And it can be incredibly overwhelming to look for different types of concepts on Google. So if the powers that be wanted to oversaturate the market with leadership concepts, there would be a big check next to empathy. There's so much stuff out there right now. And as I said earlier, it's a little bit concerning because people know that empathy is important, but I think there are a lot of empathy misses and misconceptions and mistakes that people make that could actually drive teammates and teams further apart. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this concept now. What did I find on Google? So I found a number of different things. These are all different words that are very similar or are components of empathy. Stuff like empathic, concern, emotional contagion, theory of mind, pro-social behaviors. And guess what? We're not going to get to all these today. And I'm not even going to try to get to all these today. But I am going to concentrate on 3 components that I think are pretty important. We have cognitive empathy, affective empathy, and empathic understanding. The first stop we're going to make is at affective empathy, or what is more commonly known as emotional empathy. This is empathy where you're feeling with somebody and it's more of a visceral experience. Connecting to another's emotional experience is what effective empathy is about. A lot of times we can't really even control when we feel effective or emotional empathy. It just comes through. So I'm going to show a short video now where I want to warn you, it might be a little bit triggering for some people. It involves a baseball game and a young fan getting hit by a ball. It doesn't show any violence, but what it does show is people's reactions to this experience. So I want you to, as you watch this video, it's very short, just note how many different empathetic reactions you're seeing.
In the minor leagues, I mean, you've got some guys that everybody's high on down there.
Yeah, no question. And I think our guys have a tough time cracking our team. That's one of the things I said in spring training. Is this a tough team to crack?
AJ, that one went sizzling off into the stands, and just hope everybody's okay.
Everybody's shaking.
Yeah, it hit a young child, and so Almora is really shaken up right there, and I mean, he saw it.
All right. So I want you to notice a few different things here. We see the empathy immediately with Almora when he sees what happened. We see empathy with the lady behind, the camera zooms in. The camera zooms in. We see empathy with his teammates. We as the viewers are empathizing with how people are experiencing this moment. And this is a type of affective or emotional empathy. It produces a feeling of trust and creates a deeper connection with somebody, such as this still shot here that we're seeing with his teammate comforting him. I want to get something straight though. Empathy is not always about when someone needs to be comforted or is going through a hard time. You can empathize with any emotion there is. You can empathize with someone's joy or happiness. You can empathize with anger or sadness. It goes along the entire spectrum of emotion. So empathy in itself doesn't mean comforting. Empathy means connecting. So just keep that in mind as we move forward.
Hey, Taylor, I have a good question that came in from one of your viewers.
Okay.
And I know you're going to get to this a little bit later, but I think it might be appropriate for this video just showed too. Someone's asking, where does empathy fit into emotional intelligence? And then adds on, does an organization have its own emotional intelligence, or is it up to individuals in the organization? And so the reason why I thought it might be appropriate here is because you can see, in this situation, the organization is the team. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think empathy fits into emotional intelligence because empathy really is one of the core of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is being able to have emotional literacy. What we're going to talk about later is being able to understand emotions, being able to understand what emotions mean and how they can interact in an organization with people. And to your question about if an organization can have its own emotional intelligence, if I'm understanding that right, it sounds like you're asking, can an organization create its own language around emotional intelligence? Sure, I think an organization can have its own emotional intelligence, but I think this is a longer conversation than I have time to adequately answer right now. But yes, empathy is an incredibly important part of emotional intelligence. It's really the ability to discern and understand emotions within yourself and within other people. So I'm going to move on now. One con that we can see in effective and emotional empathy is if we get too wrapped up in people's stories and we adopt them as our own, this crosses over to another thing that might not be considered empathy, but more considered identification or even emotional contagion, which is pretty topical right now in that when an emotion spreads across a whole population. So imagine the fear and the anxiety and stuff that's spreading because of our current situation around coronavirus. This is a cousin of empathy, but this isn't really empathy because it's not based on connecting with another person. It's more like a yawn or something that you're kind of catching from another person. That's why it spreads so quickly across a population. Another con of emotional effective empathy is leading to emotional exhaustion or burnout. So if someone is feeling effective empathy on a daily basis at high amounts, think nurses, doctors, therapists, social workers, people who are constantly experiencing this can really kind of experience an emotional burnout or exhaustion on it. So keep that in mind if you are in one of these helping professions, that there does need to be a healthy distance between you and the people that you are empathizing with, because you could end up going into that mode of identification. So we're going to move on now to the second concept, which is cognitive empathy. So cognitive empathy is really more about critical thought. It's creating a feeling of perspective taking, a contextual awareness and a non-judgment of that awareness, and understanding someone's truth as true, even though it's different from yours. So this is more about being able to discern what somebody is thinking, what people's motivations and priorities are. And it's about communicating with people in ways that honor them as unique individuals. So think about a boss in an organization being able to communicate with his employees in a way that makes sense to them. So this is kind of cognitive empathy at its core. And one of the cons of cognitive empathy is that you can use it to manipulate people. You can use it to influence people to your own selfish means. So we need to understand that empathy in itself is not always altruistic. It can be used for motives that are not necessarily in service of the people in the relationship. Keep that in mind as you talk about empathy and as you use empathy. Think about if you, what's the intention behind the empathy, and make sure that it is serving both you and the person or the people that you are empathizing with. We're going to watch.
Do you mind if I interrupt here before you get into the next video? There's a lot of really interesting questions coming in. Some of them revolve around the ability to, or inability to teach empathy. Mm-hmm. And can that soft skill of empathy be taught, or is it something that's learned? And I think that I know you're going to touch on that a little bit later, but let's see. There's another comment here. Connectedness is on individual level, but how can you create accountability around an organization's emotional intelligence expectations? So I just wanted to kind of put that into your thought process right now. Again, I know you're going to touch on that a little bit later, but there are a lot of people who are interested in this ability to, like, how, if I feel like I'm not doing a good job, can I learn how to do it better? Or for supervisors, maybe also this person just is that competency of empathy, they're having a real hard time with it. Can I teach that person to be more empathetic?
Yes, we can. Empathy is a skill that can be taught. I think some people have more of a disposition for empathy than others. We're going to be talking about one big component of empathy later that I think directly can influence someone's ability to be empathetic. I'm not going to ruin the surprise, but it's something that's already been talked about once on a previous webinar. And creating accountability around empathy, that is a really interesting concept. And I think the best practices that I see in creating accountability around emotional intelligence or empathy is really the leadership of the organization modeling accountability for empathy and for emotional intelligence. For example, my supervisor at the center I work at, he has from day one modeled this really kind of heart-centered, empathetic approach to anything that we're doing. And I think that's really where emotional intelligence starts. If people in the organization see the leadership modeling that and see the leadership really going the distance with emotional intelligence, or specifically empathy, that will become the norm, and that will become the shared value of the organization. But if there is someone or a group of people who are really struggling with emotional intelligence and empathy, we really need to look at kind of the deeper factors that are underplaying that. Brene Brown talks a lot about shame in organizations, and that could be a big factor. If it's a shame and blame culture, a culture around finger pointing, and if we can't see a lot of psychological safety in the organization, that's a big indication that there's something really deep going on within that organization. And I think if you just approach it by saying you need to be more empathetic, I don't think that's going to solve any of the issues. So without knowing more about exactly what's going on, that's what I would say. But yes, absolutely, empathy is something that can be taught, but the person doing the learning really has to be open to wanting to be more empathetic. And I think that's where you want to start, is asking if they really want to be more empathetic. Hope I answered that question all right. All right, we're going to move on now. This is a short video of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella talking about empathy. And I want you to just look at it from the perspective of innovation. Think about empathy and innovation.
But when I think about empathy or compassion, I think it's a business essential. We are in the business of basically meeting unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. And there's no way you're going to be able to get that consistently right if you don't have that deep sense of empathy or being able to see what others are seeing.
So here, Satya really demonstrates the need for empathy when you're trying to figure out what your customers need. He talked about unarticulated needs. And that is a huge component of innovation and creativity in organizations. And a prime example of cognitive empathy. It's really critical thought, and it's a cornerstone of what they call design thinking. So as you move forward, think about how effective and emotional empathy can intermingle with cognitive empathy. And really, you need both of those to understand people at their core. And that's when we move on to empathic understanding, which is essentially feeling with somebody, understanding their thoughts and beliefs, and understanding it from someone else's frame of reference. We're really going to get into this idea that people have different truths and different frames of reference, different perspectives through which they see the world. And those perspectives are as true for them as your perspective is as true for you. Even if you don't agree, or even if you think they're wrong, or what they believe is not right, that is their truth, and that is where they're operating from. We're going to watch a short video now, a little bit longer than the ones before, but this is a researcher and therapist called Carl Rogers in 1974. And he is talking about his definition of empathy and empathic understanding. Therapists are really the rock stars of empathy. Their ability to completely drop their own perceptual lens and see the world through another's eyes is really some of the best. And I understand that's not always accessible for people, especially when you're in the business world and you're working with deadlines and expectations and standards. But just listen to how Rogers describes some of the components of empathy and this video, watching this really opened up my eyes to what empathic understanding really is about.
The way of being with another person, which is termed empathic, has several facets. It means entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive moment to moment to the changing felt meanings which flow in this other person, to the fear or rage or tenderness or confusion or whatever that he or she is experiencing. It means temporarily living in his life, moving about in it delicately, without making judgments, sensing meanings of which he is scarcely aware, but not trying to uncover feelings of which he is totally unaware, since this would be too threatening. It includes communicating your sensings of his world as you look with fresh and unfrightened eyes at elements of which he is fearful. It means frequently checking with him as to the accuracy of your sensings and being guided by his responses. You are a confident companion to him in his world. By pointing to the possible meanings in the flow of his or her experiencing, you help him to focus on this useful type of referent, to experience his meanings more fully and to move forward in his or her experiencing. Now, to be with another in this way means that for the time being, you lay aside the views and values that you hold for yourself in order to enter his world without prejudice. In some sense, it means that you lay aside yourself, and this can only be done by a person who is secure enough in himself that he knows he will not get lost in what may turn out to be the strange or bizarre world of the other, and can comfortably return to his own world when he wishes.
All right. Emil, are there any questions that are coming up about this video immediately?
There were, first of all, somebody just wanted to, a reminder who it was, that the speaker is Carl Rogers, who I think you'll sort of explain is kind of the granddad of empathy in a lot of ways. But there were a few questions. There's a really interesting question about what do you do with somebody who's on the autism spectrum. That's a much larger topic than I think you're able to get to today, but it's a good one.
I could give a pretty quick answer to that question.
Oh, great. Why don't you do that? And then there's two more questions after that I'm hoping you might be able to get to as well.
Yeah, someone on the autism spectrum is going to have trouble, may have trouble empathizing with people. And they may also be frustrated by other people's inability to perceive and understand their emotions. So that really is exclusive, though, to effective or emotional empathy. And a person on the autism spectrum will be able to access cognitive empathy through using critical thinking, through using situational awareness, and using what that person is saying to understand what that person may be experiencing emotionally. So they can hone these really strong skills of understanding cognitively what that person is thinking, and therefore try to then figure out what their emotions are. So while people with autism can't really, may not be able to really feel the same emotions that person is feeling in the moment, because they might have trouble discerning it, they can take perspective in the same way. Go ahead, Emil.
Okay, that's great. There's another one about gender and empathy, particular, this issue of women in leadership or managerial roles who are in a lot of ways kind of pressured to be more empathetic, more so than what a male leader or manager, or a woman who expresses her emotions more frequently, she gets treated as if she has no empathy if those emotions fall outside an acceptable range. So I guess kind of the question in that way is, is there a double standard when it comes to empathy, the competency of empathy as it relates to men and women?
Sure, I do. Yeah, I do see a double standard. I think we, as men and women both, and non-binary or anything in that regard, we are placed into boxes of what the expectations of men and women are, and that's unfortunate. I think in our business world and our society moving forward, I think empathy really is going to make it so there is less of an expectation of women to be empathetic and men to be more less in tune with emotions. I think if I could impress anything on anybody, is that we shouldn't be putting people in boxes. We shouldn't be labeling people because of what we expect them to be. And yeah, what was the other part of that question, Emil?
I think you really touched on it. I think that there could be a whole talk. Other people are kind of commenting about this concept. When women express too much empathy, they can be seen as too nice or overly emotional. And it's a double bind, as this person says. And I think this should be a talk in and of itself. I think it's a great subject that we should explore a little bit more.
Definitely.
There's some other leadership related questions, and I'm thinking maybe it might be a good time to launch this poll that we have.
Okay.
But I want to talk about the questions that were coming in terms of what do we do hiring leaders and really recognizing and hiring for empathy in that particular competency or skill set. And a follow-up from that same person is, what do you do about leaders who don't want to be empathetic? Is there something that can be done on a lower level or as a direct report or an individual contributor to help the organization as a whole be more empathetic when, I think this is a very common thing where we can, right now is so often the case, you're preaching to the converted in a lot of ways, because it's the people who, hear about empathy and they're just resistant to the concept and don't want to have anything to do with it. So if you want to touch on that, and then I'll launch the poll.
Yeah, I think that's one of the misconceptions about empathy, is that it's centered around someone going easy on somebody or agreeing with somebody or saying kind of being nice. I think empathy is oftentimes confused as being nice or being soft, when empathy is really just your awareness or your boss's awareness or your teammates' awareness or whatever, to be able to see things more clearly through your perception, or just be aware that your truth and your perception is different from theirs, and kind of use that in their decision making. So we just had a poll up here, and the question is, how would you rate your boss when it comes to practicing empathy? So I think this is a really important and interesting question, and we've got some good results coming through here.
I'll post the results when we finish up. I'll give it another 10 seconds or so to get people in, and then I'll end the poll and display it.
Yeah. So for those of you who are coming in on the poor and fair side of empathy, I want you to continue to pay attention to how empathy might be a little bit different than then you've experienced it. And what I mean by that is, are they maybe, are your bosses maybe practicing cognitive empathy and understanding cognitively what you may be going through, and not so much practicing effective empathy and feeling what you're feeling, because they're two very different things.
That's a great point. And I think that's kind of the thesis of your webinar here, is that there are different ways of expressing and understanding empathy. And these results are better than I had hoped. So I'm glad to see that. But I'm sharing it right now, and you can see that the plurality is on good. So yeah, that's encouraging, maybe.
Yeah. So, but in terms of people lower in the organization influencing a boss's empathy, try something here. And this is something I've tried a few times. And we're going to get to different empathy skills in the end of the presentation. But the next time you are chatting with your boss or your supervisor, and they're talking about maybe something, a challenge they're working through, if they discuss stuff like that with you, I want you to try something. Try to connect to the emotion or the feeling that they're experiencing, and not in a way that's pandering or you know, kind of I guess pandering is the best way to describe it. But say something along the lines of, hey Bob, that sounds really frustrating for you. I can see how you're upset with this, this situation, given that, you've tried to contact them multiple times. Try to connect with emotion and see what their reaction is. I see this is very frustrating for you. I see this as very angry. It's understandable that you're angry. That might not be accessible for some people, but if you start to speak in that language of emotion and they really start to shy away from it, then that tells you that they might be more on the cognitive side of empathy than the affective side of empathy. But just do a small experiment and see what the response comes back as.
I have a good comment along those lines from a good friend of learning development. He's saying, I don't need my leadership to feel what I feel. I just want them to understand how people are feeling. I think that's kind of what you're getting at here too.
Yeah.
All right, you better move along. Thanks.
You ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to Brene Brown's definition of empathy, which I think is the most well-known definition of empathy, and it's pretty simple. She has it in 4 points, and these are really the basics. I love the definition, and here are my thoughts. So first we have perspective taking. And Brene and Carl might differ on a few ideas, one of which Brene says perspective taking is not about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's about learning, because she asserts you can't actually take your perceptual lens off. She says it's kind of welded to our psyche. So trying to really see through the eyes of another in Brene's mind is actually pretty impossible to do. But what you can do is honor their perspective as their truth and just understand that. So Carl, on the other hand, would say you can step into the private perceptual world of another person and really see it through their eyes. You can take your judgments, your biases, your perspectives, and set them to the side and really see through the eyes of another. I think we all have our version of truth based on the experiences we have in our life. So in the spirit of empathy, I want to pop up. Did we make that other poll, Emil, on people's defaults in terms of empathy?
No, I thought that we would just do this as a sort of comment, have people comment it through chat, and then I'll try and read a couple of them.
Gotcha. So in the spirit of empathy, I'll say some people believe that they can drop their own perspectives and biases and judgments. And others would say that that's really challenging for them to do, especially when you're trying to empathize with someone with whom you don't agree, or with whom you're in a high stress situation. I want you to think for about 10 seconds. I'll give you 10 seconds. What is your default? Do you believe you can objectively step outside yourself and really see through the perspective of another person, really see their emotions and see their feelings and their beliefs? So take a few moments, do an honest assessment.
Feel free to, comment in a chat or a thought. And if we have time, I'll read a couple of them. Somebody right away is saying, heck no. Somebody else is saying, not always, especially in tense situations, which you're going to get to. I think that's, when our guard is down, it's harder to be empathetic.
Yeah.
Somebody else is saying, I find it challenging to see through another person's eyes when I don't agree. Of course, that's, not easy. Go ahead.
Let me say that one thing that Carl and Brene would definitely agree is that perspective taking requires becoming the learner and not the knower. If you pretend to or think you know what somebody's perspective is, and you think you really know their experience, then that's going to shut you down to learning. So perspective taking really requires you to understand that their perspective is very different from yours. And even if you don't agree with them, can you see how it's understandable that they have that perspective? So for me, as someone who studies empathy and really takes a very non-judgmental view of a lot of people, I do feel like I can see a lot of different perspectives, but that's taken me a long time to develop. And even when I don't agree with people, I do feel like I can sometimes see, well, I don't agree with you, but I do understand. So
this
now,
is I want to read this one comment. I think it's really important. I do not think I can truly set aside my own perceptual lens. The intersectional nature of people's identities leaves me with blind spots I don't know I have. So this is a really important and a salient point made here, that the biggest problem is the blind spots that we don't know that we have. We can try and overcome things that we're aware of, but when we have no context of other people's experiences, that makes it extremely hard, if not impossible.
Absolutely, and that would be called kind of not knowing what you don't know, right? It's this idea
right, exactly.
of being unconscious to the things that might be influencing your perception. It's hard to drop them if you don't know that they're there. These would be such things as implicit bias, something that a lot of people have ingrained into them from society, from their parents, from their upbringing, and they have no idea. And I think we all have them to some extent, unless you've done really hard work on trying to identify and get over those. So we're going to move on now. I know there's a lot of
Thanks for your comments, everybody. There are a lot of really excellent comments here. Thanks for sharing.
So we have non-judgment is her next component, which means being non-judgmental of another's experience. So remember, it's their truth. So who are we to judge their experience as right or wrong, good or bad? So I keep saying their experience because you can judge actions, behaviors, decisions, things that are in reality as good or bad, but someone's inner perceptual world, if you're judging that, it's really hard to see their truth as truth if you're kind of putting them into a box. So judgment is essentially labeling somebody, and labeling brings certainty. Certainty brings control. And what you're doing when you judge somebody is kind of saying, I'm going to take your experience, I'm going to put you in this box where I can control you. I can know what you're experiencing, and I can know what to think about it. So judgment really makes people close up. It shuts down trust totally. but non-judgment really opens people up, and it opens up relationships with trust and connection. Non-judgment is something that does not come natural. It is something that needs to be practiced over and over and over again. Even me, I've been practicing this for a long time. I still have judgments, but the difference between what I'm able to do and what someone who has not been practicing this for a while has been able to do is I'm aware of my judgments, and I can see my judgments. They might still be there, but I can at least see them, so I can begin to back them off and pull them down. So we're just going to keep on going here, and we'll come getting kind of close on time.
Yep, sounds good.
All right. So perspectives. The next step, is understanding another person's feelings. And this is the idea of emotional ignorance leading to empathetic fails, where emotional literacy leads to empathetic accuracy. Emotional literacy essentially means identifying emotions in yourself and others. So as an adult, we can identify anywhere between 20 to 50 different emotions. Where you are on that scale will help you, the higher you are on that scale will help you be more empathetic, both cognitively and emotionally. The last step is communicating that understanding. And a good thing to think about is fess up when you mess up. So we're going to get this wrong on more than a few occasions. And these are called empathetic fails or empathy misses. I just urge you to be humble if you get something wrong. Trying to explain why your interpretation is right and their interpretation is wrong, okay? Judgment words, right and wrong, is only going to make people close up. So try again. Reset, acknowledge when you miss, and try again. Now we're going to jump into empathy and leadership. Going back to Google. So I typed in how to be a more empathetic leader. And this is all the stuff that came back on Google, all the different lists, 5 top ways to become a more empathetic leader. And they're all kind of overwhelming. How could we do all of this stuff? It seems unrealistic. Wouldn't it be nice if there was one specific thing that you could do that would help you build empathy more consistently, help your leaders and your supervisors be more empathetic on a daily basis? Man, wouldn't that be nice? Oh, wait, it's called mindfulness. And if you were at one of these webinars last time, you saw mindfulness and leadership being discussed. And today we're going to talk about mindfulness and empathy. People get tripped up on the word mindfulness. And essentially, mindfulness means awareness. All mindfulness is a keen, focused awareness. And we practice mindfulness by paying attention non-judgmentally, which means we try to drop our lenses and see the world more objectively or more clearly. So from this new awareness, we gain wisdom and insight about ourselves and others. You can see logically why mindfulness can be important for empathy. What is the research out there around mindfulness and empathy? Back to Google. What do we got? Empathy and mindfulness. I'm going to distill down the 5 major takeaways from 5 prominent studies, because there are hundreds of studies out there about mindfulness and empathy. Some of them say mindfulness helps empathy. Some of them say mindfulness doesn't help empathy. I think there's been a precedent set that mindfulness can have a positive impact on empathy. And these are the five of the top studies that show that. Study 1 showed that during meditation, blood flow increases in certain parts of the brain. Study 2, those same regions are indicated in playing a part in empathy. Study 3, mindfulness was associated with greater engagement in empathy. Study 4, mindfulness predicted empathy. And finally, study 5 from Harvard was a meta-analysis of 26 studies which had randomized controlled trials that showed meditation increases empathy. Again, this is not for us to say mindfulness is the cure-all when it comes to empathy, but it does set a precedent that there has been some positive, promising findings found around mindfulness and empathy. So keep that in mind for those of you thinking, how do I build empathy? How do I get others to build empathy? I think mindfulness is a good place to start. And mindfulness doesn't always mean meditation. Mindfulness could mean just the way that people are seeing the world, the way that you are building awareness around your relationships, around the people you're speaking with, building awareness about yourself. So again, mindfulness is not meditation. Meditation is a tool to build mindfulness. We're going to go into the three components of what I call mindful empathy.
Taylor, quick question from somebody watching. Is it possible to be too empathetic?
Right. Remember in the beginning, we talked about the cons of effective or emotional empathy, which can be exhaustive, emotionally exhausting, or it could lead to burnout. There are some concerns from people. Oh, if I'm too empathetic, then I'm going to get taken advantage of. If I'm too empathetic, I'm going to be able to see everybody's perspective, and I won't be able to form an opinion of my own. Remember, empathy is not agreeing with people. Empathy is not endorsing other people's views. There's this other construct called identification, where if you feel the same thing that somebody's feeling and then you adopt their belief, that is identification, right? So if you are consistently bouncing around from person to person and adopting their beliefs or adopting what they think or agreeing with people, bouncing back and forth, kind of ping-ponging around, I would not call that empathy. That could be, a result of maybe an extreme form of empathy moved over to this idea of emotional identification. But too empathetic, if you're able to look at somebody's perspective as if you're in their perceptual world, I think there's really no limit to how much you can feel with somebody, as long as you can keep that distance of I'm a person here, they're a person there. I hope that makes sense. All right, so we've got a few minutes here. So my three components of mindful empathy are listen, confirm, and communicate. And I believe mindfulness really is a prerequisite for being empathetic in any situation. I don't think if you go through Brené's 4 components of empathy, I think that mindfulness is really a prerequisite for all of those. So we're going to go through this right now. Listen. The first part of mindful empathy is listening. And this involves 4 parts. Focused attention. Attention really is the currency of connection. So attending to what is being said and what is not being said really allows you to be more empathetic with the person that you're talking to or the people that you're talking to. If you're not paying attention to the conversation, then you are not being empathetic. This is the first step of mindful empathy. Second step is beginner's mind. So before we talked about you're always a beginner when it comes to someone else's perception. What we often think we know gets in the way of learning something new. So drop what you think you know, look at everything as if you're looking at it for the first time. The next step is curiosity. Everybody wants to be heard. So be really curious about what you think you're hearing. Be really curious about what the meaning is behind the words that they're saying. So come at it from a place, again, of curiosity and not a place of, I know what they're experiencing. I've been there before. Even if they're experiencing something that's exactly what you've experienced, they might not be experiencing it in the same way that you are. The last part of listening is awareness. So this is awareness of what is coming up for you. We all have triggers. Remember, we all have things in our own truth, in our own perception, our own world. So observe the judgments as they come up. And if you feel biases coming up, or if you feel prejudices coming up, just observe that and recognize that they could influence your ability to be empathetic with this person, especially if you're not agreeing with that person. Only after you become aware can you decide what to do with those judgments. I know we probably have some questions here, but I want to get through at least confirm and communicate, and then I'll take questions.
Yeah.
Next part is confirm, and this isn't confirming to them yet. This is confirming to yourself. So this goes right from the last part of listen, which was awareness. So confirm, are you listening accurately? What emotions or beliefs or parts of your experience could be clouding your own perception? Remember earlier, we talked about how, there's a lot of unconscious beliefs, there are unconscious biases. Being aware that some things may be unconscious for you. Some things might be coming up and you don't know where they're coming from. And that's okay. You don't need to condemn yourself if stuff comes up that you aren't kind of expecting. For example, if a good friend is taking you through a hard time and all of a sudden something is coming up for you where you're saying to yourself, God, quit your whining. This isn't that hard, right? But in your mind, you're saying, where is that coming from, right? You don't have to condemn yourself for that. You can just notice that as it comes up. This is a part of being mindful. Observe how that feels for you, and then be there for your friend, right? And if you want to give them some advice, try to give them some advice in a respectful way rather than just letting stuff come out as it comes up. So that's a part of being mindful.
But Taylor, I just want to say we are at the hour, so of course we completely understand that other people are logging off to get onto other meetings, and I really appreciate everybody's time they spent with us. We're going to keep going here, so if you have the time, feel free to stay with us. But again, thanks for those of you who have to move on. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Emil. And we just have a few more minutes here, so we'll be off within about 5 minutes. The next part is front-loading mindfulness, and what does this mean? This essentially just means building accuracy through mindfulness. Remember, mindfulness equals awareness. So when we become aware of emotion, then we can become more comfortable with it. We can learn from it. We can understand how to label it and how to interact with it. And a good exercise for this is called mental noting. And it's essentially just taking a few minutes out of your day to sit, close your eyes, breathe, and just be aware of the emotions or the thoughts that are coming up in your mind. And this is the way that you become aware of emotion and thought. And you can do it by just when something comes in your mind, when thought comes in your mind, you just say the word out loud, thought, and you're just labeling it as thought. And then if an emotion, if you feel an emotion, you can do this anytime during the day, emotion. If you feel something in your body, sensation. So once you start to experience thoughts, emotions, sensations in a way that where they're not so tied to you, where you can just see them coming and going, thought, emotion, sensation, then you can begin to build upon that and really start to understand what they are.
Someone's pointing out that this is what we call awareness meditation. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes. And the last part of confirming is try it on. So I always say low risk situations are the best place to practice empathy. I'm talking about with your spouse, your kids, your friends. When they're experiencing some emotion that's not very high or intense, just recognize that. Oh, they're happy right now. You seem very content right now. You seem to have a lot of satisfaction in this. Those are low risk situations. And once you get in the habit of identifying emotion in low risk situations, you can start to try them in more risky situations. So I'm talking about at work, with your boss, with your coworkers, stuff like that. All right. Last one is communicate. And these are the two most important things in building mindful empathy on teams and among teammates and coworkers. I picked this up in my executive coach training with the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, and it was created by Bruce Schneider. So it's called Acknowledging and Validating. And you can do this with anybody. You can do this with anybody, and it will build trust in an instant. And you do not have to agree with them. You can do this with people you disagree with totally, but this opens people up immediately. It immediately changes the energy in any situation. It's just acknowledging people's truth, acknowledge their experience, and validate their emotions. Emotions are the same no matter what people's experience are. Fear is fear, happiness is happiness, sadness is sadness, joy is joy. Emotions are always real. They're never fake, right? Your experience might be different from their experience, but you can acknowledge it as real for them. Because remember, it's just as real for them as it is for you. So this is what acknowledging and validating sounds like. So imagine I'm talking to somebody about something they're upset about. Perhaps they got overlooked for a promotion. This is what it would look like. It sounds like this has been pretty upsetting for you. I'm acknowledging that it was upsetting for them. It's understandable that you feel angry. That's validating their emotion of anger. Given that you were overlooked for the promotion, again, acknowledging, it can be very upsetting when we don't feel recognized for our work. That's normalizing. When people feel like their experience is normal, or when they feel like it's valid, they open up. They don't feel alone. They start to trust and connect with you. So just, if you don't remember anything from this presentation, just remember, acknowledge someone's experience and validate their emotions. You can do this with anybody. All right. So I was going to tell a story here, but we're already over. So you can look at this pretty stock photo of people working.
I do have a really important question that I'd like you to address, just given our current state of affairs. Given our current national struggle, what is a good way to be empathetic in the face of an employee sharing their personal crises, and how would this differ prior to and post quarantine?
It's a good question.
And also, some people are writing in to tell you to tell the story. So answer the question and then go ahead and tell the story.
Okay. How to be empathetic during quarantine and post quarantine? Well, I think it starts with mindfulness. My experience is different from your experience, and it's different from her experience. It's different from his experience. Remember, be the learner, not the knower. I don't know how your experience was. I don't know if you had a loved one who passed. I don't know if you've had some financial hardship. You have to be the learner, not the knower. And if you have had financial hardship, and I have too, I don't have to be like, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. Oh, let's talk about my experience now, right? Empathy is about them, not you. Even if they experience the very same thing, that doesn't mean they're having the same emotions about it. So be the learner, not the knower. Come from a mindful perspective. Drop your perceptions, drop your judgments. And when we come out of quarantine, hopefully soon, I think, empathy, it doesn't really change. I think we need to continue being mindfully empathetic to people. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, Emil, but I'd like to tell a quick story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The other day, my wife was doing some work, and they recently had to take all of their programming online. So she's been under a lot of stress, and I've been here the whole time. And she was basically having to compose a hard email around something that was incredibly emotionally charged for her. And she asked for me to read the email, and she asked for me to give input on the email. So from my perspective, the way that I would have gone about that is look at all of the critiques that she was going to get back. She was writing the email to a group of people. And I was thinking about all of the things that people could say And I was going to role play each person and say what their response was going to be. So then in the email, she could address that prior to her sending the email. But this came off in a very kind of knowing way, a very judgmental way, a very I know what is best kind of way. But I wasn't reading her during that moment. I wasn't very empathetic or in tune with her emotions. You know, she was clearly upset about having to write the email. She was clearly stressed out about it. She was clearly emotionally charged. And then when I came at her with all of these things that people were going to say, that felt like another person kind of piling onto her. So in that situation, had I listened a little bit more, I think I would have heard what was going on in the situation a little bit better. And I wouldn't have put my own perspective and perceptions onto it. Had I confirmed with myself, am I empathizing in this situation accurately? You know, in my mind, it seemed like she was experiencing a certain thing, but what it turned out is she was experiencing something completely different. It was coming from a completely other place. So had I taken a moment to check in and confirm with myself if I was experiencing that accurately, then we could have avoided the situation that unfolded. And then communicating, acknowledging and validating. Hey, babe, it sounds like this is really, really hard for you. It sounds like it's really frustrating for you. You know, it's understandable. I mean, you've gone back and forth with these people 10 times and they're still don't seem to be appreciating what you're doing for them. I think it's really normal in this situation for you to feel that way. I've certainly been in similar situations. Totally would have opened it up. But I wasn't doing that. I wasn't very empathetic, and it ended us having to take a little bit of space from each other for a few hours. And then we came back and I was able to help her with the email. But all that stuff could have been avoided if I was a little bit more mindful. I listened, I confirmed inside myself, and then I communicated. So that's my story. I hope it's helpful.
Good story. Thanks, Taylor. So there's so many great comments and questions throughout the last hour. I would love to be able to have you address all of them. Honestly, they're just really remarkable. It's a great opportunity for knowledge sharing experiences. I'm going to try and talk you into creating a little brief video that maybe addresses a lot of these questions that we can post later, because some of these topics are much bigger. So if we weren't able to get to your comment or your question, I apologize, but I do think that maybe what, you know, Taylor or in partnership with some other people, we can look at these comments and questions and build another, you know, brief little video, 10 or 15 minutes that looks at these comments. As I mentioned, we are recording this right now, and we're going to make sure that it's closed captioned, and then we will share out the recorded version of this video on our website, UT Learning and Development website. And if you haven't done so, please make sure that you join our LinkedIn group. We'll send an email to all of you when the video is available. And again, thank you all so much for your help. Thank you, Taylor. If you have any parting words of wisdom, we appreciate it.
Can I share my tweet-worthy takeaways?
Yes.
All right, quickly. First one, don't wait to practice empathy until it's needed. Very important. Second, empathy is not reserved for those you like or agree with. Very important. Last one, give empathy to those you feel deserve it the least, because often they're the ones who need it the most. All right, and I'll leave you guys off with this. Empathy is a non-negotiable. And that's all I have, Emil. And everybody who's here, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to reach me, you can find me in the UT directory. And I'd love to have many chats about empathy, vulnerability, courage, or anything else along those lines in leadership. So it's been a pleasure. And don't forget to tune into the pods, where I'll be talking to leaders around the university, including UT athletics coaches, some doctors from Del Med, and other places around the university. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody. You can expect to see a link So if you missed anything, you can watch it again. And again, thank you, Taylor, so much for this amazing webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.